What's up guys, my name is Fari and in today's video I'm going to be going through the lesson I keep relearning, how that has shaped me and how I'm using that as fuel to build into the future. So like always, the main mission of these videos is to build the Thinking OS both internally and externally, the one that we are ultimately able to use in terms of logging decisions and how we're basically able to solve problems inside Killer Chaos OS, which is our own internal operating system that we run in order to build backends. And also personally for me, to just use these as modes to build my consistency in many different aspects and facets of my life, and also just making sure that each and every single day I'm showing up in many different ways and just making sure that I'm learning as much as possible through each and every single video. So if there's one thing that I have been able to learn in the past 90 days of showing up daily and what it has taught me, is this one thing, which is consistency compounds faster than inspiration. When I started making videos and making each and every single day, I couldn't believe that, I would get to 100. I said, yeah, 100%. Let's do it. Let's get to 100 and let's ultimately just make sure that I'm building that habit from within. And ultimately, that is going to get me there. Sure, to be honest, in the beginning, I was super inspired. I saw like Ryan Klog, which shout out to him. He inspired me to, build out these 100 days. But if it wasn't for him, I would have, probably wouldn't have been making these daily videos. But then also realizing that, hey, that inspiration, only lasted for so long because I started facing times where, I was struggling a lot and saying, hey, should I actively just make a video today? I don't feel like it. And that is ultimately one of the things that I have been able to fully just kick out, in my life, and just understanding that, hey, if I don't feel like doing something, then it's probably a good indicator that I should be doing it each and every single day, and making sure that I'm showing up and making sure that, hey, if I'm able to show up for the business and I'm able to show up for what it is that I'm building on the back end, I should be able to show up on the front end as well to say, hey, I'm using this as a platform to ultimately learn, which is the number one mode, to say, hey, I want to see how, I started out in day 1 and day 90 and see how I am in day 90, because ultimately there's going to be a lot of growth, that I'm going to capture within that time. And ultimately understanding that, hey, I actively want to document this growth so that I can see it in real time to say, hey, in the beginning I couldn't speak, I was, rambling a little bit maybe, but ultimately getting that sharper sense, and saying, hey, I'm more sharper in terms of how I'm able to communicate, that I can just, whip out the camera and just press record. I think that's something that's also super cool to say, hey, I've learned this skill and I've stacked the skill of saying, hey, if you throw a camera in front of me, I'm just going to be able to talk, which I realized was one of the things that I knew internally that I was, pretty decent at, until I had to do it. And I just realized that, hey, maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was. But ultimately through that, and just slowly just understanding that, hey, I thought I was as good as I was, but then now I realize that there's a completely different level, and I still feel till this day that I'm not nowhere near, the best of the best speakers, but I'm a lot further than I was in the beginning. But through that, I wouldn't be able to, kind of document and see that journey if it wasn't for these daily videos. And I think there's a lot of value in just being able to see on a day-to-day how, for me, how I've progressed in terms of my thinking, what strategies and systems that we're implementing, and just seeing, hey, this is popping off and this is not popping off. The main goal was never ever ever to go viral, to say, hey, I'm gonna have 100,000 views, 200,000 views, because ultimately I think, if you take that approach, and if I had taken that approach to say, hey, this is the main mission, which is just to get lots of views and lots of connections and engagements and all these things. I know it's a byproduct, of course, but if that had been the center stage in terms of, hey, I just want to get this virality and all this kind of stuff, I don't think it would have, pushed me to say, hey, each and every single day I am sending a message to the older version of myself that the younger version that I am today is actively building. And I want to look back on these videos when I'm older to say, hey, look at how much, I've been able to, progress, how I've been able to learn so much as well. Because you know what that means? It also ultimately means that, for me, I used to wait until I was ready, quote unquote ready. Sometimes I do still kind of, just wait to say, hey, I want to be ready. But I've found within myself, even just through doing these daily videos, that everything in my life moves as soon as I just stop waiting to be ready and just execute. I think that is the number one thing, just being able to, create, launch, and execute. And another thing that I've been thinking about lately is that, a lot of people, spend a lot of money, they spend all these things on a day-to-day basis, and where they're spending that is people that create, people that are actively, building stuff. And that makes me realize that each and every single day I need to be building a lot more than I was in the beginning. Because I think, one of the most important modes is, I told myself that, hey, maybe I might be building a lot, but clearly now that, I've been doing and outputting, 90 days in a row, 3 months, I realized that what I was doing was not even 50%, not even 40% of my full potential. Now it's just asking, hey, now that inspiration phase is quote unquote over, how do I now turn that into leverage and just execute on a day-to-day basis? Because do that, the truth is that the truth is that inspiration shows up once you start moving, to say, hey, I'm inspired to build. I can watch a video and say, hey, I'm super pumped, I want to build and do all these things. But ultimately, that's just watching a video, and that's motivation, if you say. But motivation only gets you so far. And I think just raw, sheer execution ultimately brings that inspiration that you need to say, hey, I'm inspired to be building each and every single day. I'll have bad days, when I won't, necessarily feel like recording. Like yesterday, I wasn't particularly like super pumped to be, recording as, I normally am. But ultimately, that is something that I want to just leave it out there to say, hey, I'm also human. I'm not always perfect. To say, hey, each and every single day, I'm just, on it, and I have so much energy to record these daily videos. No, it is taxing. It's a lot of work, especially to, balance out everything, to say, hey, I'm focusing on these daily videos, making sure that I'm outputting and I'm just, learning a lot more, and saying, hey, this is what I'm actively doing on a day-to-day basis. This is what I'm learning, and this is what I'm implementing into the future. Whether this works or not, I'm simply just going to document that, because into the future, there may be so many nuggets that we can actively just pull from. And I want these to be evergreen. I want these videos to particularly just be evergreen, in the sense that they ultimately just serve, me in terms of what I believe in now and into the future as well. Because I think that is going to stay consistent when I'm saying, hey, the main mission was always to build Killer Chaos OS into the version that, we see it to be into the future, and also the person as well, because it's all down to me as well, how I'm able to grow, how I'm able to lead as well, in terms of what it is that I'm actively building, and making sure that we're just focusing solely on just creating value. And value output is going to be the number one mode that we need to make sure that we're driving on a day-to-day basis. And I think, with these daily videos, when I realize it or not, they do a lot more, and a lot more people see it, a lot more people see it than I think they do. But ultimately understanding that, hey, the real growth didn't come from my best days, but it came from showing up on the average days and stacking small wins each and every single day. When I don't feel like recording and I don't feel like being consistent, that is ultimately my mind saying, hey, you actively just need to do this. It may be hard, 100%, but if you just stick it out for that extra 10 miles that you're going to put in, ultimately that is going to pave the way in ways that you may not see immediately, but it ultimately compounds and it builds the modes for who you're going to be into the future. Like I said in the beginning, I said in the beginning countless times to say, hey, if I say we're going to be solving these massive problems, and we're going to be doing the things that we're going to be doing into the future, and creating as much value, how are we going to say we're going to do that but we can't even do 100 days? And I think that is the way to think about it, to say, hey, we want to just make sure that for me personally, I'm building that consistency mode, because that is then going to translate into the team, to say, hey, if I'm able to do 100 days and 100 videos in 100 days, then we are 1000% going to build what it is that that we're going to be building into the future. And this is what I've also realized by myself about myself, to say, hey, I don't need perfect conditions. I solely just, before it's probably, one of those things where you say, hey, I need XYZ to be true and then I can do it. But it's like, no, that's not the case. You ultimately just need to build from what you have, and then into the future that ultimately, gets you to where you want to get to. And I would admit that, probably what I'm realizing is that that came from, solely just growing up in environmental factors as well. Because when I was younger, I was never like this, just waiting for the perfect conditions. I just did stuff, and that's the reason why I was able to produce the videos that I did 9 years ago that are still on my channel till this day. And that is ultimately trying to bring that back, to say, hey, I just need minimum standard of output on a day-to-day basis that I refuse to drop below. So my minimum standard now is just a video a day. That is the minimum standard, for me to say, hey, I'm pumping out a video a day, and everything else that happens ultimately is a bonus, because this creates leverage into the future, and it ultimately scales what it is that I'm doing and what I'm going to be doing into the future, and also gives the team a platform to learn and understand that, hey, if you want to be part of the team and you want to join and you want to build cool things with us, then ultimately this is the level of execution and standards that we hold. And I think that is ultimately going to translate that, just simply through these videos, because my discipline matters more than my motivation. And I think solely just you look at everyone at the top levels, and you just solely see them and you say, hey, how did they get there? And I think discipline is one of those modes that they actively implemented, to just do the boring things each and every single day, and through just doing those boring things they were able to get to where they want to get to. But ultimately I think it's probably not seen because it's so boring and it's so long, and you're doing it over a long extended period of time, that it's just it's just not something that you see on the surface. But if you dig a lot deeper, you solely just understand that, hey, they did things for a very long time, and that's why they got to the stage that they actively got to, and ultimately that is what built them into the person that they are that day. So how can I actively just steal nuggets, because I like to just steal different nuggets and just kind of incorporate it into my daily life, because at the end of the day, I'm still young. I still need to learn and just ultimately just go and just execute and just make sure that each and every single day I'm building that consistency mode, because through that I know that into the future when we build the vision of Killer Chaos OS, discipline is going to be the number one thing that is ultimately going to get us there. And how do I build this each and every single day? By understanding that every time I push through resistance, I need to build a new floor. No, that is basically coming from understanding that, hey, each time I build, I push through resistance, I'm building a new floor. And how do I keep building a new floor each and every single day, or even each and every single month? By saying, hey, what felt impossible 3 months ago is now my baseline. And I think this is the thing about breaking boundaries, of breaking what you think is impossible today and creating a new realm of reality tomorrow. It's simply just building that discipline to say, hey, I want to push through this resistance, and this resistance is ultimately going to build me into the person that, these things I thought were impossible 3 months ago are ultimately the new baseline that I run off of, and creating a new realm of possibilities and just breaking through that each and every single time. And I think, life is all about learning, and I think it's all solely just making sure that, hey, you get motivation from time to time, but ultimately the number one key indicator that you need to be pushing on a day-to-day basis is solely just discipline. And that is my personal shift for me as well, to say, hey, I'm no longer chasing peaks of motivation, because that only lasts so long. And I've spoken about this in a couple of videos, to say, hey, motivation only gets you so far, but discipline gets you much further. And saying, hey, I'm building systems and habits that raise my baseline, so that even on my worst days I move forward. Because I think one of the most important things is building systems. I think systems and thinking of things in operating system lens is the way that I like to think of things, to say, hey, I have a personal OS, or my mental OS, and then we have the OS for Chaos Killer OS, which is our own internal operating system, like I said in the beginning, that governs how we're basically able to build backend systems. But also you watching this, I believe that everyone has a mental operating system that governs who they are, how they're able to think about the things that they think about, how they're able to log decisions, the decisions that they take on, on a day-to-day basis, based on, how they experience life as well, and also how they solve problems, because their worldview basically is an operating system that builds the person that they are, and also ultimately guides the decisions that they're able to make today and how they're able to move into the future. And I think all about, sharpening this personal operating system, is ultimately the game for me personally, to say, hey, each and every single day I need to make sure that I'm sharpening my my mental OS, because understanding that, hey, if anything else is going to get me to where we need to get to, it's within me. It starts within me, and then ultimately translates into the team. I can't expect, every single person on the team to have a growth mindset if I don't even have a growth mindset, or the people around me, how can I expect them, to have a growth mindset if I myself don't even have one? And I think this is one of the most important modes, to just say each and every single day, I'm stacking learning, I'm stacking, what I'm learning from building these videos on a day-to-day basis, and just increasing, the discipline and the level of discipline that I'm integrating in terms of my life, and just scaling that up each and every single day. So something that I feel is impossible today becomes my baseline into the future. And I'm still learning, still, iterating, and just rapidly trying to iterate each and every single day so that we can scale it up. And now we're on day 90, day 100 pretty soon. I'm pretty excited about that. Got a special announcement on day 100, so stay tuned for that on what is next. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to connect with me on X, LinkedIn, Instagram. Links are in the description, and I will see you guys